The day it all began unraveling was a Tuesday. A regular Tuesday. The kind where the sun streams through the blinds just so, and you think the world is in perfect order. Claire was bustling around the kitchen, her usual hurried self before her work trip. She kissed me on the cheek, a fleeting gesture that felt more like a habit than love. "I'll be back by Thursday evening," she said, grabbing her suitcase. "Don't forget Emma's soccer practice tonight." I nodded, sipping my coffee, letting her words blend into the background noise of our morning routine. It wasn't until the door clicked shut behind her that I realized something felt off. This wasn't the first time she'd left on a work trip, but the unease gnawed at me like a splinter. Maybe it was the way she avoided eye contact as she spoke or how she tucked her hair behind her ear, an old nervous habit. Whatever it was, the seed of doubt was planted. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the monotony of married life. But then came the glove box incident. Later that day, while searching for a pen to jot down Emma's practice schedule, my hand brushed against a crumpled receipt. A boutique hotel downtown. The date was last weekend, when she told me she was visiting her sister. Confusion turned to disbelief. Claire was meticulous with her stories, she never slipped up. But this receipt was glaring evidence of something she hadn't mentioned. I tried rationalizing it, maybe she met a client there, maybe she needed a quiet place to work. But the nagging feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself in front of the computer, logging into our shared credit card account. It wasn't snooping, I told myself. It was clarifying. What I saw stopped me cold. A string of charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, wine bars we'd never visited, and then, another hotel. Different from the one on the receipt but just as damning. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. It was one thing to suspect, it was another to see the evidence laid bare. But I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. Not without more proof. I needed to be sure before I tore our life apart. The next morning, I began my quiet investigation. Claire's phone sat charging on the kitchen counter, an innocuous piece of tech that suddenly felt like Pandora's box. I glanced at the kids, engrossed in their cereal and cartoons, before picking it up. Her lock screen was simple, a 4-digit code. My birthday. My chest tightened as the screen unlocked. The first thing I saw was a text, "Looking forward to Friday night. Can't wait to see you again." It was from someone named Kevin. My vision blurred, and the phone trembled in my grip. I scrolled up, my worst fears confirmed in a trail of flirtatious messages, explicit exchanges, and photos that turned my stomach. Claire's betrayal wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated, ongoing affair. When she returned home on Thursday, I played my part perfectly, calm, unsuspecting, the doting husband. If she noticed the tightness in my smile or the coldness in my touch, she didn't let on. She was glowing, her face alight with some secret joy that now made my stomach churn. Work was exhausting, she sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "I'm so glad to be home." I forced a smile, nodding as though her words didn't slice through me. "I'm glad you're back." But inside, the storm was brewing. This wasn't going to be a confrontation of anger or tears. No, Claire didn't deserve the satisfaction of my devastation. If she wanted to shatter the life we'd built together, I'd make sure she felt every shard. The next day, I contacted a private investigator. His name was Eric, a no-nonsense man with a quiet intensity. When I explained the situation, he nodded as though he'd heard it all before. Maybe he had. "Give me 2 weeks," he said, sliding a contract across the desk. "I'll get you what you need." Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Every time Claire smiled at me, kissed me goodnight, or asked how my day was, I wanted to scream. But I played my role, biding my time, pretending everything was fine. Eric didn't disappoint. When I met him again, he handed me a thick envelope. Inside were photos of Claire with Kevin, holding hands at a cafe, kissing outside a hotel, laughing over dinner. There was no denying it now. "Do you want me to keep digging?" Eric asked, his voice calm. "No," I said, my resolve hardening. "This is enough." It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of control. Claire thought she could live this double life without consequences. She thought she could betray me and still come home to the life I'd worked so hard to build. She was wrong. The idea for the dinner party came to me one sleepless night. If Claire wanted to play house with Kevin, I'd let her, publicly, spectacularly. I arranged everything meticulously, down to the guest list. Claire was thrilled when I told her we were hosting a gathering. "It's been so long since we had friends over," she said, her excitement genuine. I fought the urge to laugh. On the night of the party, Claire was radiant, her charm on full display as she mingled with our guests. Kevin arrived with his wife, an unsuspecting woman whose life was about to change forever. I watched them from across the room, the way Kevin's eyes lingered on Claire, the way her laughter came a little too easily. When dinner was over, I stood, raising my glass for a toast. The room quieted, all eyes on me. Claire beamed, thinking I was about to praise her for being the perfect hostess. "To trust," I began, my voice steady. "To loyalty. To the people who betray it." The color drained from Claire's face. Kevin froze, his glass halfway to his lips. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope, laying the photos on the table for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room. Kevin's wife burst into tears, pushing away from the table. Claire stammered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. I can explain," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't give her the chance. The room was silent except for the muffled sobs of Kevin's wife. The guests sat frozen, their gazes darting between the photos scattered across the table and Claire's ashen face. Kevin looked like a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing but no words escaping. Claire reached for my arm, her nails biting into my skin. "Please, Mark, let's talk about this privately," she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to her, keeping my expression cold, unyielding. "Privately? Was anything about this private for you, Claire?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once loved. But the anger bubbling inside me smothered any pity I might have felt. I turned to the guests. "I apologize for the disruption, everyone. Clearly, I've been living in the dark while my wife here has been enjoying herself a little too much." Kevin's wife, a petite brunette named Lisa, stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She grabbed one of the photos, glaring at Kevin. "How could you?" she choked out, tears streaming down her face. Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the dining room, leaving Kevin fumbling to follow her. I'm so sorry," Kevin stammered, glancing between me and Claire before rushing after his wife. The tension in the room was suffocating. Slowly, the other guests began to rise, muttering awkward apologies before making their exits. Within minutes, it was just Claire and me in the wreckage of what had once been a happy gathering. She tried to speak, her voice breaking. "Mark, please, let me explain." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Explain? You've been lying to me for months, years, maybe. What's left to explain, Claire?" She stepped closer, her hands outstretched as if to touch me, but I recoiled. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she pleaded. "It didn't mean anything." "I didn't mean anything," I snapped, my voice rising. "You destroyed our marriage, humiliated me in front of everyone we know, and you're going to stand there and tell me it didn't mean anything?" She broke down then, collapsing into a chair and sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, my chest tight, my fists clenched. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to drown in her guilt. The next few days were a blur. I moved into the guest room, refusing to share the bed with her. Claire tried to apologize, tried to talk to me, but I shut her down every time. I couldn't look at her without seeing those photos, without hearing Kevin's words from her texts, "Can't wait to see you again." I threw myself into work, avoiding home as much as possible. But even the office felt like a prison, the walls seemed to close in on me, the silence too loud. My co-workers noticed the change, their concerned looks and hesitant questions only fueling my frustration. I met with my lawyer, Jennifer Pratt, on a Wednesday morning. She was sharp, professional, and completely no-nonsense, a woman who clearly had no patience for cheaters. "I've reviewed the evidence you provided," she said, tapping the folder on her desk. "You have a strong case for divorce. With the photos, texts, and private investigators' report, the judge will likely favor you when it comes to assets and custody." Custody. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Our children, Emma and Daniel, were the only reasons I hadn't packed my bags and disappeared. I couldn't abandon them, couldn't let them see the cracks in the life we'd built. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying me. "With your income and the circumstances of her infidelity, I'm confident we can secure it for you. But be prepared, these things can get messy." Messy. That was an understatement. When I got home that evening, Claire was waiting for me in the living room. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood as I entered, wringing her hands nervously. "Mark, please," she began, her voice soft. "We need to talk." I didn't respond, brushing past her toward the kitchen. But she followed me, her desperation evident. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, don't throw everything away." I turned to her, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Don't throw everything away. Claire, you already did that when you decided Kevin was worth more than your family." She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that. Stop," I snapped, my voice cutting through her excuses. "I don't want to hear your justifications, your apologies, or your promises to change. You made your choices, Claire. Now you live with them." Her shoulders slumped, her sobs growing louder. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to be weak, not now. "I've contacted a lawyer," I said, my voice cold. "We'll be filing for divorce. I suggest you do the same." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "No, Mark, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. For the kids, for us. Fix this." I laughed bitterly. "You think this is something we can fix? You destroyed my trust, Claire. And without trust, there's nothing left to fix." She crumbled then, falling to her knees and sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a moment, the woman I once loved reduced to a broken shell. But I couldn't let myself feel pity, not after what she'd done. Without another word, I turned and left the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her betrayal. The days that followed were agonizing. I focused on Emma and Daniel, doing my best to shield them from the storm brewing between their mother and me. They were too young to understand, too innocent to be dragged into the chaos. But the tension in the house was palpable, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. Claire tried to act normal, but her forced smiles and overcompensating gestures only made things worse. The kids sensed something was wrong, even if they couldn't put it into words. One evening, after tucking them into bed, I found Claire sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at her wine glass. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of hope and despair. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've lost your trust, but please, don't take the kids away from me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, she was still their mother. But the thought of her infidelity affecting them, of Kevin stepping into their lives, made my blood boil. "I don't want them to lose you," I said finally, my voice tight. "But I won't let them see us like this." Claire nodded, her tears falling silently. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes, a realization of the damage she'd done. But understanding wasn't enough. Not anymore. The house felt quieter after that night. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but quieter, like the hush before a storm. Claire kept her distance, tiptoeing around the house like a ghost. The kids picked up on the tension, though they didn't ask questions. I told myself I was protecting them by not explaining, but in truth, I didn't have the words. I spent my days buried in work and my nights planning my next steps. Divorce wasn't just a legal process, it was a dismantling of a life, a splitting of assets, memories, and, most painfully, our children's sense of stability. Jennifer, my lawyer, had warned me about the emotional toll, but nothing could have prepared me for the ache that came with every step forward. Claire tried to keep up appearances, pretending we were still a team. She packed the kids' lunches, attended school events, and even cooked dinner most nights. But every interaction between us was a minefield. Her attempts at small talk were met with curt replies, and her lingering looks only made my stomach turn. One evening, as I was sorting through documents in my office, Claire knocked softly on the door. I didn't look up, but she stepped in anyway, her presence unwelcome but persistent. "Mark," she said, her voice tentative. "Can we talk? Please." I sighed, setting down the papers. "What is it, Claire?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I know I've hurt you, and I know you don't want to hear my excuses. But I need to tell you why it happened." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Why, Claire? Enlighten me." She took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "I felt invisible," she admitted. "Like I was just going through the motions. You were so busy with work, with the kids, with everything. I felt like I didn't matter anymore." Her words hit a nerve, but I didn't let it show. "So your solution was to have an affair?" I asked, my tone ice cold. "I'm not justifying it," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "I'm just trying to explain. I made a horrible mistake, Mark, and I hate myself for it. But I was lonely, and Kevin, he made me feel seen." I stared at her, the woman I had loved for over a decade, now a stranger to me. "Do you think I didn't feel lonely?" I asked, my voice low. "Do you think I didn't feel invisible sometimes? The difference is, I didn't betray you. I didn't destroy our family." She flinched as though I'd struck her, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I'm so sorry." I stood, unwilling to let her see the cracks in my armor. "You should be apologizing to the kids," I said, brushing past her. "They're the ones who will suffer the most from this." The kids were my anchor through the chaos. Emma, with her boundless energy and infectious laugh, and Daniel, with his quiet thoughtfulness. They were too young to understand the complexities of marriage and betrayal, but they knew something was wrong. Their innocent questions, "Why are you sleeping in the guest room, Dad?" or "Why does Mom cry so much?" cut deeper than any of Claire's lies. One Saturday, I took them to the park, needing a break from the tension at home. Emma ran to the swings, her blonde hair flying behind her, while Daniel stayed close, clutching his sketchbook. "Dad?" Daniel asked, his voice hesitant. "Are you and Mom mad at each other?" I crouched down to his level, forcing a smile. "We're just working through some things," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and Emma very much." He nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "Is it because of that guy who keeps calling Mom?" My stomach dropped. "What guy?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Daniel shrugged. I don't know. I heard her talking to someone on the phone. She sounded sad. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. Thanks for telling me, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. Why don't you go draw something? I'll push Emma on the swings. That night, after the kids were asleep, I confronted Claire. Who's been calling you? I demanded, my voice low but firm. She looked startled, her cheeks flushing. What are you talking about? Daniel heard you on the phone, I said, stepping closer. Who is it? Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. It's Kevin, she admitted. He's been trying to reach out, but I haven't answered. I swear. Why would he even think he has the right to call you? I asked, my anger barely contained. He's struggling, she said, avoiding my gaze. Lisa left him, and he's been trying to talk to me about. I don't care about his struggles, I interrupted, my voice rising. You've already done enough damage, Claire. Cut him off. Completely. I will, she said quickly. I promise. Her promises meant nothing to me anymore, but I had to trust that she'd follow through. For the kid's sake, if nothing else. The weeks dragged on, each day blurring into the next. I met with Jennifer regularly, finalizing the details of the divorce. Claire tried to fight it at first, pleading for another chance, but eventually, she relented. She knew there was no going back. One night, as I sat in the guest room going over custody arrangements, Claire knocked on the door. Come in, I said without looking up. She stepped inside, holding a folded piece of paper. I wrote something for you, she said, her voice trembling. I know it won't change anything, but I needed to say it. I took the paper reluctantly, unfolding it to reveal a handwritten letter. Her words were raw, filled with regret and self-loathing. She admitted to everything, her loneliness, her mistakes, her guilt, and begged for forgiveness, not for herself, but for the sake of our children. As I read, a part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the redemption she so desperately sought. But another part of me, the part that had been broken by her betrayal, couldn't let go. When I finished, I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. I'll always care about you, Claire, I said quietly. But I can't forgive you. Not yet. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. And for the first time, I believed her. The finalization of the divorce felt like the beginning of the end. Papers signed, custody arrangements settled, and our life together reduced to a series of legal documents. Claire moved out of the house and into a modest apartment nearby to stay close to the kids. Despite everything, she wanted to remain present in their lives, and I couldn't deny them their mother. I tried to move forward, to rebuild the pieces of my life that Claire had shattered. But even as I put on a brave face for Emma and Daniel, the cracks were still there, raw and exposed beneath the surface. One evening, a month after Claire moved out, the kids were staying with her for the weekend. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against you like a weight. I tried to distract myself with work, with TV, with anything that would keep my mind from wandering back to the memories. Around midnight, the phone rang. The sharp sound echoed in the empty house, startling me. I picked it up, my stomach twisting when I saw Claire's name on the caller ID. Hello? I said, my voice tight. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a deep, unfamiliar voice. Mr. Collins? Yes, I said, my heart pounding. Who is this? This is Officer Grant with the Silverdale Police Department, the voice said. I'm calling about Claire Collins. There's been an accident. The words didn't register at first. An accident? I repeated, my voice faint. Yes, sir, the officer said. She was involved in a car crash on Route 14 earlier this evening. I'm afraid she didn't survive. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My legs gave out, and I sank into the nearest chair, my mind racing. Claire, gone. It didn't make sense. Just hours ago, she was with the kids, probably tucking them into bed. How could she be gone? Mr. Collins, the officer's voice crackled faintly from the receiver on the floor. I picked it up with trembling hands. What about the kids? I croaked. Were they with her? No, sir, the officer said quickly. The children were with a neighbor. Ms. Collins left them there before heading out. We're still investigating the cause of the accident, but it appears she lost control of her vehicle. I barely heard the rest of his words. My mind was consumed by a whirlwind of grief, guilt, and disbelief. Claire was gone. The mother of my children, the woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. The days that followed were a blur. Arrangements had to be made, calls to family, funeral plans, endless paperwork. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, each decision heavier than the last. I had no choice but to hold it together for Emma and Daniel. They didn't fully understand what had happened, only that their mother wasn't coming back. Why can't we see Mommy? Emma asked one night, her wide eyes filled with confusion. I knelt beside her, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. Mommy had an accident, sweetheart, I said gently. She's in heaven now. Emma's lower lip trembled. But I don't want her to be in heaven. I want her here. I know, I whispered, pulling her into my arms. I know, baby. Daniel was quieter in his grief, withdrawing into himself. He spent hours in his room, drawing or staring out the window. I tried to reach him, to let him know it was okay to talk about his feelings, but he shut me out. The night before the funeral, I found myself in the attic, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. Boxes of old photos, keepsakes from trips we'd taken, love letters from a time when we were happy. I found the scrapbook Claire had made when Emma was born, filled with pictures and notes in her neat handwriting. Flipping through the pages, I was struck by the sheer weight of what we had lost, not just Claire, but the future we had once dreamed of, the family we had built. Her betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it didn't erase the love we had shared, the life we had created together. As I sat there, lost in memories, a piece of paper slipped out from between the pages of the scrapbook. It was a letter, addressed to me in Claire's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Mark. If you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to say goodbye properly. I've made so many mistakes, hurt you in ways I can never take back. But despite everything, I want you to know that I always loved you. I let my insecurities and selfishness cloud what really mattered, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Please take care of Emma and Daniel. They're the best parts of both of us, and they need you more than ever. Teach them to be kind, to be strong, to forgive, even when it feels impossible. I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. You deserve peace, Mark. You deserve happiness. Love always, Claire. Tears blurred the words as I read them over and over. The anger, the betrayal, the bitterness, they all dissolved in that moment, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. I would never get the chance to forgive Claire, never get the chance to tell her that despite everything, she mattered. She always had. The funeral was small, attended by close friends and family. Emma clung to me, her small hand gripping mine tightly, while Daniel stood stoically by my side. As the casket was lowered into the ground, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality, a door closing on a chapter one wasn't ready to end. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece our lives back together. The kids needed stability, and I needed to be strong for them. But every night, when the house was quiet and the world felt still, I would find myself replaying the memories, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I could have saved her. Life moved on, as it always does. The pain dulled over time, but it never disappeared completely. Claire's absence was a void I learned to live with, a reminder of the fragility of love, of trust, of life itself. And though she was gone, her final words stayed with me, a beacon in the darkness: teach them to forgive, even when it feels impossible.